So imagine sitting in your home, right? You're just completely minding your own business.
Right.
Like maybe you're reading a book or drinking some tea, just living a normal, quiet life. And suddenly, um, police break down your door.
Wow.
Yeah, they raid your house, they seize all your electronics, and they demand, like, every single one of your passwords.
Just out of nowhere.
Exactly. Now, sitting there as they comb through your entire digital life, you might be thinking you must have accidentally committed something terrible, right? Like a massive financial crime, or maybe you inadvertently stumbled into some dangerous conspiracy.
You'd assume it has to be huge.
But no, your crime, hitting the retweet button,
Right.
less than 100 times, spread out over 3 entire years to an audience of, like, fewer than 100 followers.
I mean, it really sounds like the inciting incident of some dystopian science fiction novel, doesn't it? But it is a very real, highly documented event.
And that is exactly what we do here on the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We take this massive stack of dense source material, articles, research papers, legal documents, and we extract the most important nuggets of knowledge. We want to give you a shortcut to being well-informed.
Yeah, save you the time of reading thousands of pages.
Exactly. So today our mission is to explore this just fascinating collision between the Chinese legal system, the digital footprint of a single citizen, and, believe it or not, the laws of quantum physics and network topology.
It's a wild mix.
It really is. And the sources we have for you today are just incredible. We're looking at official Chinese court verdicts, indictments, and this staggering 20,000-word blood letter written right from a Kunming prison cell.
Yeah, and we also have a comparative analysis of this entire case evaluated by 6 major AI language models. But before we go any further, I do need to establish some firm ground rules for you.
Right. Very important.
Yeah, we are dealing with some highly politically charged material today. It involves the Chinese judicial system, state leadership, and an individual's dissent. So it is crucial to state clearly right now that we are taking absolutely no political sides here.
None at all.
Right. Our goal is strictly to report impartially on the content of the provided documents. We're just here to analyze the arguments made by the prosecution, the highly technical defense mounted by the defendant, and the analytical evaluations from those AI models.
We aren't endorsing any of their viewpoint.
Exactly. This is purely an exploration of the logic and the structural arguments presented in these texts, nothing more.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
We really have to start with the physical catalyst for all these legal documents, which is the raid itself.
Yeah, the starting point.
Right, because to understand the sheer scale of the legal machinery that got activated here, we have to know exactly what physical actions triggered it.
Well, we are looking at September 2022 in the city of Kunming. Police enter the temporary residence of a Dr. Chen Jingyuan. And Dr. Chen, who was born in 1976, is an independent scholar holding a PhD in physics. Now, the documents indicate the police search his home from top to bottom, but they find absolutely no physical contraband.
Not at all.
None. There are no weapons, no legal substances, no pamphlets, nothing. What they do extract after demanding his passwords is the entire history of his overseas chat software.
Which was Twitter, right.
Specifically his Twitter account, yeah.
And based on what they find, just scrolling through his Twitter history, they officially charge him.
Right.
The charge is, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble. And the prosecution cited this specific Supreme People's Court interpretation regarding cyberspace. They claimed that Chen spread false information that caused serious disorder of public space.
And the consequence of that?
The final result of this charge was that he was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison.
Wow. And the documents actually break down the police's digital evidence against him into 4 highly specific categories of posts.
Let's hear them.
First, art and political cartoons. So, for example, they flagged a drawing of an umbrella girl, which was referencing the Hong Kong protests, and a caricature featuring Xi Jinping and Donald Trump.
Okay, so just drawings.
Right. Second was emotional expressions, such as an image of a lit candle commemorating June 4th. Third was academic and political commentary.
Like what?
This included retweeted speeches by U.S. politicians and various academic articles. And finally, the 4th category was historical documents. So things like the edit histories of Mao's selected works alongside some old state media articles.
See, I have to push back on the prosecution's foundational definition of false information here.
How so?
Well, if I retweet an image of a Picasso painting, you cannot legally arrest me for spreading false information just because human faces don't actually have 2 noses on the same side of their head.
Right, that's not what art is.
Exactly. How can abstract art or a subjective emotion be legally categorized as a verifiable false fact. You can't put a political cartoon or like a candle emoji under a microscope and measure its objective truth. It fundamentally miscategorizes what art and emotion are.
And that specific friction is actually central to the legal documents. The prosecution was handling expressions of opinion, subjective art, and open academic discourse, but they basically took all of those elements and shoved them into this rigid legal bucket of objective falsehoods.
But if the prosecution is placing subjective art into an objective bucket, how did the Chinese court legally justify turning these low-level subjective retweets into an actual criminal conviction?
Wow.
I mean, without objective proof that they actually caused societal chaos, usually to prove serious disorder, a legal system requires proof of an actual riot, right? Or at least meeting some numerical threshold of going viral to prove a massive disruption occurred.
Yeah, and the source documents detail the court's exact reasoning for bypassing that, which is fascinating. The legal threshold for this specific cybercrime in China typically requires a post to be retweeted 500 times or viewed 5,000 times to be considered serious disorder.
Did he hit those numbers?
No, Dr. Chen's account didn't even come close. He had fewer than 100 followers.
Wow.
And the documents describe his audience mostly as zombie fans. Inactive or automated accounts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, his total retweets over a span of almost 20 years were under 100.
So he had basically zero reach.
Exactly. The prosecution could not prove his posts caused actual physical riots, nor could they meet those legal numerical thresholds. Consequently, the court relied on a legal framework the documents describe as a presumption of guilt.
Let's look really closely at how the judge applied that presumption of guilt, because the documents highlight a truly bizarre paradox in the ruling here.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
The judge explicitly stated that because Chen is a fully capable adult with, quote, a very high academic degree and knowledge level, he, quote, should have been able to distinguish right from wrong.
Right.
Therefore, the court reasoned because he is highly educated, he must have knowingly spread false information intending to attack the core leadership.
Right, that's their logic.
Wait, so the court is weaponizing his PhD against him?
Yes, essentially.
But if he is a scientist whose entire academic training is rooted in skepticism and the scientific method, wouldn't his high education actually make him less likely to blindly accept any single narrative as absolute truth?
You would think so, yes.
I mean, a scientist's job is literally to question assumptions. The court is completely equating high education with automatic, unquestioning agreement with the state's perspective. That is a massive leap in logic.
And this raises an important question about how legal systems attempt to handle subjective intent when they lack objective reality. The court essentially bypassed the need for concrete evidence of malicious intent or actual societal harm by using a demographic assumption, his high level of education, as a substitute for empirical proof.
Just swap him out.
Yeah. The underlying argument is that a highly educated person must inherently know the state's absolute definition of truth, making any deviation from it an act of intentional knowing malice.
But if a court uses a demographic assumption, like having a physics degree, to prove criminal intent, how does a scientist trapped in an isolated cell fight back against an assumption?
It's incredibly difficult.
Right, because he can't suddenly produce physical evidence from inside a prison. He has to use the very thing they used against him, which is his scientific logic. And this brings us to what I think is an incredible text in our stack, the 20,000-word blood letter of self-defense.
Oh, this document is amazing. Dr. Chen wrote this massive, meticulous defense from inside Kunming prison, although the source does note the prison guards ultimately refused to deliver it. But what is fascinating about this document is that he completely abandons traditional legal appeals. Instead, he dismantles the court's verdict using the strict mechanics of theoretical physics, mathematics, and complex systems theory.
We really need to dive into the mechanics of this. How exactly does a physicist mathematically prove his legal innocence?
Okay, so he begins by addressing the judge's assumption that a highly educated person must inherently know absolute right from wrong regarding societal truths.
Okay, how did you debunk that?
Chen utilizes Gödel's incompleteness theorem to dismantle this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Gödel's theorem is a foundational concept in mathematical logic. It proves that any complex logical system cannot be both entirely consistent and entirely complete at the same time. Meaning there will always be truths within the system that cannot be proven by the system's own rules.
So he is using mathematical logic to argue that the legal system itself cannot perfectly categorize every complex social reality into a perfect binary of objective truth or objective falsehood.
Exactly, not without creating contradictions.
That is brilliant.
Furthermore, Chen addresses the charge that his retweets caused serious disorder in society. He explains that human society is a complex system that naturally exists on the edge between order and chaos.
Okay.
And to explain why this chaos is natural and not criminal, he cites the CAP theorem from computer science.
Right, the CAP theorem. That stands for consistency, availability, and partition tolerance.
Right, you got it. Think of a globally distributed network, whether that is thousands of computer servers or millions of human minds on the internet.
Sure.
You ideally want everyone in the network to see the exact same information at the exact same time, that is consistency.
Right.
You want them all to be able to communicate constantly, that is availability. And you want the network to survive if communication between some nodes breaks down, that is partition tolerance.
Right, you want all three.
But the CAP theorem proves mathematically that you can only ever have two of these three things at once.
Ah. Because the internet requires availability and partition tolerance to function globally, it must mathematically sacrifice perfect consistency. So he is saying that perfect, uniform order, like everyone agreeing on the exact same truth at the same time, is mathematically impossible in a distributed network.
Yes. Therefore, differing opinions, or what the court calls chaos, is actually a built-in architectural requirement of the internet. It's not a malicious condition created by a single user.
That is just wow.
And he doesn't stop there. He moves from the architecture of the internet to the specific physics of his own Twitter account.
To prove he couldn't have caused a disruption even if he wanted to.
Exactly. He introduces the mechanism of self-organized criticality and the Galton-Watson extinction theorem.
Okay, you might have to break that down for me.
Sure. The Galton-Watson theorem is used in probability theory to study branching processes. Epidemiologists use it to calculate the R0, or reproduction number, of a virus.
Oh, right. Like, if the R0 is less than 1, the virus naturally dies out because each person infects less than one other person on average.
Exactly. Chen applied this exact mathematical branching process to calculate how a retweet cascades through a network.
Because every time someone posts, you look at how many people share it. One person shares it to 2, who share it to 4, a viral cascade.
Right. And Chen calculates his specific mathematical position in the Twitter network. He defines his account as a marginal node because he has virtually no active followers. His average branch number of propagation, which is the mathematical equivalent of an R0 for his retweets, is far less than 1.
Okay, I want to visualize this. If you drop a heavy stone into a perfectly still pond, the ripples amplify and spread outward. That's a viral post.
Yeah.
But a node with an average branch number of less than 1 is like dropping a pebble into a room lined completely with heavy acoustic foam.
I love that analogy.
Right. The sound of the pebble hitting the floor doesn't echo. It gets absorbed by the foam and the acoustic energy dies almost instantly.
In physics terminology, Chen calculates that his account exists in a deep subcritical zone. He provides the mathematical proof showing that the probability of his retweets triggering a systemic avalanche, which is the legal equivalent of serious public disorder, mathematically approaches absolute zero. It isn't just unlikely, it is a statistical impossibility based on network topology.
It's like the court is charging him with breaking the camel's back with a single piece of straw. But Chen is using physics to prove he wasn't even in the same desert as the camel.
Exactly.
He isn't standing in front of the judge saying, I didn't cause a riot. He is saying, look at the topology of the network. My specific node does not possess the kinetic or acoustic energy required to cause the avalanche you are accusing me of.
Right.
He proved his innocence not with an alibi, but with the laws of mathematics.
Which is incredible.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the human judges in Kunming completely ignored this highly technical defense.
They just brushed it aside.
They fundamentally couldn't or wouldn't process the physics. So our source material introduces a fascinating thought experiment. What happens when this complex collision of human law and quantum science is removed from a political courtroom and instead subjected to objective, non-human analysis?
Yeah, the source documents include a comprehensive evaluation of the entire case conducted by 6 major artificial intelligence language models.
6 of them.
Yeah, Grok, Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, and Qwen. The researchers fed these models the official legal indictments, the court verdicts, and Dr. Chen's mathematical defense.
And what happened? Despite all their different programming architectures, different safety guardrails, and different foundational training data,
Right.
every single one of these AI models reached a unanimous conclusion. The sources refer to it as a digital rule of law consensus. Basically, the criminal conviction fundamentally lacks legal basis.
And to understand why they reached this conclusion, we have to look at the mechanism of how large language models evaluate text. LLMs do not have political allegiances or emotional biases.
They're just math engines.
Right, massive probabilistic math engines. They evaluate logical proximity, epistemological consistency, and causal chains.
Okay, so how did they break down the case?
Well, when Gemini analyzed the text, it noted a profound epistemological disconnect. It observed that the court utilized closed, authoritarian, conclusion-first language, while Dr. Chen utilized open, scientific, evidence-based reasoning.
So they were basically talking past each other.
The AI recognized they were speaking two entirely incompatible languages of truth.
What about the others?
ChatGPT evaluated the causal chains. It looked for the bridge between point A and point B. It noted that the court took an act of low-intensity sharing a retweet, generating zero engagement, and instantly categorized it as a crime causing severe disorder.
Just jumping straight to the conclusion.
Yeah. ChatGPT flagged this as a fundamentally broken legal chain, pointing out that the human court entirely skipped the necessary logical step of proving actual harm or mapping causality. It found a mathematical void where the evidence should have been.
Wow. And didn't Copilot pick up on a major procedural issue?
Yes. Copilot zeroed in on what is arguably the most fatal procedural flaw in the entire process, which occurred during the appellate court's ruling.
What happened there?
After Chen was convicted, he appealed. And when the Kunming Intermediate Court formally dismissed Dr. Chen's appeal, their stated legal reason on the document was that the, quote, appellant submitted no new evidence.
Hold on, we need to pause on that. In standard criminal law across the globe, the burden of proof is always, fundamentally, on the prosecution.
Right.
That is the bedrock of justice. How can an appellate court legally demand a man who was locked inside an isolated prison cell, stripped of his electronics, completely cut off from the outside world, to suddenly produce new physical evidence to prove his own innocence?
It's incredibly bleak.
That is Kafkaesque. It turns the entire concept of the burden of proof upside down.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the AI analysis highlights how this specific appellate ruling represents a total systemic breakdown of the presumption of innocence.
Yeah.
The AIs process the logic of that demand and point out that by requiring the defendant to independently prove his innocence from a cell, rather than requiring the state to empirically prove his guilt with concrete evidence of a societal avalanche, the trial is reduced to what the documents term a pseudo-proposition. It ceases to be an inquiry into truth and becomes a predetermined outcome wrapped in the aesthetics of legal procedure.
It is basically a simulation of a trial.
Yes.
The AI models essentially stepped in to act as a neutral, logic-driven appellate court that the human judicial system failed to provide. They stripped away all the complex political context and simply ran the math of the legal statutes. Like, does A logically lead to B?
And their unanimous mathematical answer was no.
No! That is just staggering.
The AI evaluations collectively emphasize a terrifying vulnerability here. When subjective interpretations, such as a judge deciding a political cartoon is an objective falsehood, replaces empirical causal evidence, the foundational rule of law breaks down.
Absolutely.
The LLMs, operating purely on logical probability, independently validated the exact same mathematical and topological defense that Dr. Chen formulated by hand in his cell.
You know, you might be wondering why you should care about a localized, highly specific legal case in Kunming.
Right. Why does this matter to the listener?
The reason is that you, listening right now, are a node in a massive digital network. We all are. This deep dive illustrates the incredible, terrifying friction that occurs when 20th century legal statutes, originally written to police physical public order on physical streets, attempt to police 21st century digital network dynamics.
It's a total mismatch.
It really is.
Yeah.
It asks us to seriously consider who gets to define truth, rumor, and chaos in the information age. I mean, if retweeting a piece of abstract art or a dry academic opinion to a tiny audience can be legally defined by a court as causing a societal avalanche, then the definitions of reality itself are entirely up for grabs.
Exactly. The mechanism of this case perfectly highlights the vulnerability of the individual in the modern digital age. Your digital footprint, no matter how small, how old, or how seemingly insignificant the engagement, can be extracted, completely recontextualized by authorities, and weaponized by systems that simply do not operate on the same logic of objective truth and mathematical evidence that you do.
So what does this all mean? We started with a physical door being kicked in over a few dozen old retweets, and we ended up navigating the realms of quantum physics, AI tribunals, and the mathematical probability of network chaos.
It's a huge journey, but I want to leave you with a final, very different piece from the source material to ponder.
Okay, what is it?
Throughout his entire ordeal, Dr. Chen relentlessly used the cutting-edge tools of modern science network topology, the CAP theorem, and Gödel's theorem to defend his innocence.
Right.
He fought back using the language of the future. But the source documents conclude with a highly evocative literary piece mimicking the style of Tan Sitong.
Tan Sitong,
Right.
the famous 19th century Chinese reformist martyr.
Exactly. During the late Qing dynasty, Tan Sitong advocated for sweeping systemic reforms. When those reforms ultimately failed and a brutal state crackdown began, he was given the opportunity to flee the country.
But he didn't take it.
No, he actively chose to stay and face execution. His foundational belief was that true, systemic change could not happen through avoidance. He believed it required blood to be spilled to awaken the slumbering consciousness of the nation.
And the source documents explicitly connect this highly technical modern physicist sitting in a Kunming cell to this historical Qing dynasty martyr.
They do. It is a haunting, deeply philosophical synthesis. I want you to mull over this final thought.
Let's hear it.
What does it say about the current trajectory of human civilization when a 21st century quantum physicist, armed with the most advanced mathematical theories and complex systems logic of our time, finds his ultimate legal and spiritual resonance not in the scientific method, but in the tragic, bloody defiance of a 19th century martyr?
That is heavy. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closely at the systems and networks around you. Keep asking the hard, logical questions. And remember that sometimes the most profound defense of reality comes from a single, marginalized node in the network, refusing to accept the mathematically impossible. Keep questioning the information around you.